Andrew, thank you so much for the very, very kind introduction. It is great to be with so many friends here today. You know, a man was driving along a country road, and he spots a little boy on the side of the road with a box of kittens and a sign that says, "Free kittens." They're Democrats. Man thinks that's kind of strange. He keeps on driving. A few days later, he's coming along the same country road, sees the same little boy, same box of kittens. But this time a sign that says, "Free kittens. They're Republicans." The man thinks that's the strangest thing I've ever seen. He pulls off on the side of the road. He comes up to me, he says, "Son, I don't understand. I drove by here a few days ago. You said these kittens were Democrats. Now they're Republicans." Little boy looks at him and goes, "Well, mister, now their eyes are open." Let me tell you, in recent weeks, we have seen over and over again how the left has their eyes closed to the realities, the dangers of this world. And I'll tell you what Freedomworks is doing every day, what is happening all across this country is people are waking up and they're opening up their eyes and they're saying, this doesn't make any sense. I want to talk to you today about liberty and security in an age of terror. You know, for 7 years, we have seen both liberty and security going away in the Obama administration. There are many in the media that tell us there's a trade-off. You can either have liberty or security. Well, under President Obama, we get neither. Under President Obama, the federal government is targeting the liberty of individual law-abiding citizens, and at the same time, it's not standing up to our enemies. And what the Obama administration gets wrong is it has a hard time distinguishing between good guys and bad guys. The Obama administration's approach is to go after the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens and at the same time fail to go after the terrorists. Let me tell you, our liberties are a critical part of why we are safe. We are secure because we can speak out and because we are armed. Yeah. You take the First Amendment. Today, Peggy Noonan has a fantastic column in the Wall Street Journal, calling on people to speak out for the First Amendment, calling against liberals who have assaulted the First Amendment. The Democrats in the Senate last year introduced a constitutional amendment to repeal the free speech protections of the First Amendment. You know, we've seen the neighbors of the San Bernardino terrorists who said, "I suspected something, I thought something was wrong, but I didn't want to say it because it wasn't politically correct." We see on college campuses and universities the speech police telling people, you can't speak unless it is sanitized. Let me tell you something. If this administration funds the nation of Iran getting a nuclear weapon and they set off a mushroom cloud, that's a pretty big microaggression. We see Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, promising in the wake of this terrorist attack, does she come out and say, we're going to track down the terrorist and kill them? No, she says the Department of Justice will prosecute anyone that has the temerity to stand up and speak against radical Islamic terrorists. Yeah. Let me tell you right now, radical Islamic terrorism is evil. Yeah. Yeah. Mr. President, there is not a moral equivalent between radical Islamic terrorists and Christians and Jews. Get up. One has a philosophy from day one of murdering those who they consider infidels, the other preach love and forgiveness and standing together as one humanity. Yeah. And let me say beyond that, in the United States, we will not enforce Sharia law. If you want to come prosecute me for executing my First Amendment rights, come and get me. I'm right here. And then we look at religious liberty. In the wake of the attack in San Bernardino, I and many other leaders expressed our prayers for the families of those who were murdered, of those who were wounded. New York Daily News ran a front-page story repeating my tweet. Now, set aside for a second, it's a little surreal to see your tweets on the front page of a newspaper. I guess that is the definition of a slow news day. But repeating my tweet and those of others, and the news on the cover of the New York Daily News is, "We don't need your prayers." They've invented a new term for that. They call it now prayer shaming.
Effed up, dude.
Well, let me tell the Democrats, let me tell the mainstream media, although I repeat myself, there has never been a time in the history of this country when we needed prayer more. The very first right protected in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights is religious liberty, the right of every single one of us to seek out and worship the Lord God Almighty with all of our hearts, minds, and souls. You know, President Obama back in 2008 was caught in a rather candid video where he described those of us not on the left coast, not on the East Coast, as bitter and angry and clinging to our God and our guns. Well, let me tell you, we're not bitter, but we're getting pretty angry. And President Obama can't have our God or our guns. Second Amendment. Yesterday here in Iowa, we announced our national Second Amendment coalition, over 23,000 patriots across this country standing for the Second Amendment. Now, the media immediately sniffed. It was insensitive to talk about the Second Amendment after the San Bernardino terrorist attack. Let me tell you something, I don't view it as my job to be sensitive to Islamic terrorists.
Yeah!
The left's immediate reaction to radical Islamic terrorists, like kittens with their eyes closed, is not to go after the bad guys, but immediately to try to seize the guns of law-abiding citizens. The New York Times on the front page has an editorial saying what we need to do is finally end the epidemic of private gun ownership in America.
Boo.
Let me tell the editors of the Times something. You don't stop the bad guys by taking away our guns. You stop the bad guys by using our guns.
Yeah! It
is precisely in an era of radical Islamic terrorism, that the Second Amendment is more important because, listen, it is not about hunting. It's not about target shooting. Those are both great fun. But that's not what the Second Amendment is about. The Second Amendment is about the God-given right of every American to protect your home and your life and your children and your family. And it is fundamentally, as our framers told us, a check on government tyranny. And then let's talk about security. Just like the federal government goes after law-abiding citizens, they fail to identify and target the real enemies. Back 6 years ago, the Fort Hood shooting. Nidal Hassan communicated with Anwar al-Awlaki, a known radical Islamic terrorist, inquired of al-Awlaki about the permissibility of waging jihad against his fellow soldiers. The Obama administration knew all of this, and they did nothing. They did not prevent that terrorist attack because it would be politically incorrect. Let me tell you, if anyone contacts a radical Islamic cleric and asks, is it permissible for me to murder others? The federal government should step in and stop that terror attack before they kill 14 innocent. You look at in Boston, the Boston bombing, the Zarnaev brothers. We knew they were radical Islamic terrorists. The FBI went and interviewed them. But then they dropped the ball. They stopped paying attention. And the elder brother posted on YouTube a call to jihad. And yet the government had stopped paying attention and they carried out a terror attack. Look, you didn't need any complicated surveillance. You needed someone paying attention to YouTube. You look at San Bernardino, what do we know about this couple? We know that the man, the jihadist there, ran in the circles with where he encountered multiple people on terrorist watch list. He flew to the Middle East. We know that his wife came into this country on a fiancé visa. By the way, the exact same visa vetting that the Obama administration promises us will keep us safe from terrorists among Syrian refugees. We know that she put on her visa application a non-existent address which the Obama administration didn't bother to notice. And we know that the female jihadist contacted ISIS and publicly using social media proclaimed her allegiance to ISIS. How about the federal government, the Obama administration, spend less time trying to read your and my emails and phone calls and more time stopping radical Islamic terrorism? If I am elected president, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. No longer will we have a president who insists the Islamic State isn't Islamic. That's just nutty.
It's over.
There's a reason it isn't called the Presbyterian state. Instead, we will have a president who will make clear we will utterly destroy ISIS. We will carpet bomb them into oblivion. I don't know if sand can glow in the dark, but we're going to find out. And we are going to make abundantly clear to any militant on the face of the planet, if you go and join ISIS, if you wage jihad against the United States of America and try to murder innocent Americans, you are signing your death warrant.
Yes.
In recent weeks, President Obama traveled abroad. He said he doesn't believe in American leadership, and he doesn't believe in America winning. He doesn't have time for that. I gotta say, FDR and JFK and Ronald Reagan must have been spinning in their graves to hear an American president say he doesn't believe in American leadership or America winning. Well, I can tell you my philosophy on radical Islamic terrorism, to borrow a page from Ronald Reagan in the Cold War, is very, very simple. We win, they lose. Yeah.
Now, Senator Cruz has been on my radio program many times, and I've asked him many questions, as I've asked many questions of many of the people here, but the next question is not from me or even the audience. It's from a guy who ran a pretty good campaign, and I think we all admire, former presidential candidate and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker.
Hi, Scott Walker here. Like Iowa, Wisconsin is heavily dependent on manufacturing and agricultural jobs. Sadly, the Obama administration's EPA has put in place new regulations that will cost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs and add huge new costs for farmers. My question is simple. As president, what will you do to make federal agencies more responsible and reasonable for farmers and manufacturers?
It's a great question and a very important question. For 7 years, the federal government has been at war with farmers, with ranchers, with small businesses, and we've been trapped in stagnation. I'm reminded of several years ago, I was in West Texas. I asked folks there, I said, what's the difference between regulators and locusts? I said, well, the thing is, you can't use pesticide on the regulators.
You could.
And this old West Texas farmer, he leaned back, said, "Want to bet?" We need a president who stands with farmers and ranchers and small businesses against the locusts descending from Washington.
Yes.
If I am elected president, we will go after the EPA.
Yeah.
We will repeal the Waters of the United States rule, which tries to give the federal government control of 97% of the farmland and land in the state of Iowa.
Go clap.
We will repeal Obamacare. We will repeal the death tax. We will adopt a simple flat tax. We will abolish the IRS. To rein in the regulators, you need a president willing to take on the bureaucratic state.
Yes. Yes.
You know, what Barack Obama has done that is wrong with executive power. Good point. But he has intruded into the Article I lawmaking authority of Congress. Under the Constitution, the president can't make the law, change the law, or ignore the law. Now, I pledged on my first day in office to rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action. But under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president has robust authority to execute the laws. And we have never once seen a president willing to take on the regulatory state. Here's the sad pattern. When Democrats are in office, regulations grow exponentially. When Republicans are in office, regulations still grow, just a little more slowly. As a cynical friend of mine suggested once, we should make a bumper sticker. Republicans we waste less. We have never seen a president willing to use the full Article 2 executive power of the presidency to go after the regulatory state, to fire regulators, to repeal regulations. And I give you my word today. If I'm elected president by... We'll accept a compromise if and when. It will not be the case that regulations will have grown more slowly, but it will be the case that by the end of that tenure, the body of federal regulations will be materially smaller.
Yeah!
Human liberty an equal amount larger.
As the format goes, the first question's on video, the second question's in person. So the second question is going to be asked by Congressman Rod Blum.
Welcome to the 1st District, Senator Cruz.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. Instead of figuring these questions out myself, I did something I thought was much better. I went to the people smarter than I, my constituents. These first questions from Tim Burak. Tim, do you want to stand up? Say hello. Tim's a farmer in Northeast Iowa, Senator. He raises hogs and farms over 1,000 acres. And his question to you is this. To a lot of Iowans, it seems that Washington, D.C. is completely incapable of fixing our country's addiction to spending and debt. We just don't feel like politicians are actually serious about fixing this problem. Everyone talks about it, but no one does anything. What specifically will your administration do to put America back on the path to fiscal responsibility and rein in the unsatiable, unsustainable spending before we run out of time?
Well, let me say at the outset, I want to thank the men and women of Iowa for sending Rod Blum to fight for you. I'll tell you, Rod is a warrior for liberty. And the Washington cartel despises this man. There is a reason that both Rod and I need food tasters in the members' dining room. So I appreciate having an ally who will stand for fiscal responsibility and stand against the bipartisan corruption of Washington, and Rod is a ferocious and very effective ally. Now, Tim, your question is very, very important. We have out-of-control spending in Washington. The biggest thing that will turn around the debt is economic growth. If you look at our federal balance sheet, that's the only first-order variable. It's why my top 2 legislative priorities are repealing Obamacare and a simple flat tax. Because economic growth transforms everything else. But when it comes to reining in spending, you've also got to be willing to take on the Washington cartel, the term I use for the career politicians in both parties that get in bed with the lobbyists and special interests and grow and grow and grow government. Now, I've rolled out a detailed spending cutting plan of over $500 billion in specific cuts that we need to make. I've outlined 5 agencies we should abolish. The Department of Education. The Department of Commerce. The Department of Energy. HUD. And the IRS. And beyond that, I've outlined 25 specific programs. Now, I will make a confession. At the last debate, I listed the 5 departments, or the agencies, and I screwed up. I left out education, and I listed commerce twice. So immediately, all the folks in the media, they were laughing, another Republican forgot it. So I went on Megyn Kelly afterwards. I said, listen, there's so much cronyism at the Department of Commerce, we need to abolish it twice. But beyond that, we need to pass a strong, balanced budget amendment.
Oh, dear God, Cruz.
We need to pass term limits.
Yeah!
We need fundamental entitlement reform to strengthen and preserve Social Security and Medicare. And you've got to end the culture of corporate welfare and handouts and cronyism and giveaways that has corrupted Washington, D.C. And Tim, I'll make a final point on that. You know, everyone on that Republican presidential debate stage, they talk about standing up to Washington. They talk about standing up to cronyism. But the natural follow-up question that I think the voters are asking is, okay, well, who actually has stood up to Washington?
You! And Mikey!
Who has taken on not just Democrats, but leaders in our own party? And I'll tell you two very simple principles. The first is scriptural. You shall know them by their fruits. And the second is from human powers of observation. Nobody ever arrived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and then grew a backbone.
Thank you very much, Congressman. All right, we have a third question. This one back to being on tape. And the debate on this network is a little rough, but there is a shining star there. CNBC's Larry Kudlow.
If the U.S. were in recession on Inauguration Day, and we've had the slowest, most tepid recovery since World War II, what 3 steps would you immediately propose in your first week in office?
It's a terrific question. As I said, the first thing I will do in office is rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive amnesty. In addition to that, I will repeal the Waters of the United States rule. In addition to that, I will approve the Keystone Pipeline. In addition to that, I will authorize the export of crude oil. In addition to that, I will open up the export of liquid natural gas. In addition to that, I will take on the EPA's blend wall that is preventing ethanol and biofuels from having a larger share of the marketplace. In addition to that, I will repeal the congressional exemption from Obamacare. And we will systematically go through the federal regulatory body, through the federal rules that are strangling jobs and economic growth, and we will remove the barriers to unchain small businesses and farmers and ranchers. You know, you need a president willing to take on the regulatory state. It ain't easy. Now, we all know that President Obama has abused executive power, but there's a silver lining to that. Everything done with executive power can be undone with executive power. And you know, every Republican candidate promises to take on regulation. But inevitably, when they get to Washington, they don't do it. And they don't do it because the cartel fights back. You remember back at the beginning of the George W. Bush administration? First couple of weeks, they rescinded a regulation on arsenic. And immediately, the front page of the newspapers, all the TV news programs said, Bush wants our kids to drink arsenic. And they pounded the living daylights out of the administration. The intended effect was to say, don't mess with the regulatory state. Don't rescind Don't pull back. It's a one-way ratchet where government power gets bigger and bigger and bigger. If you're going to change that, you've got to have the political will to stand up and take the beating from the media. That's the only way to turn it around. You've got to have the political courage to have a strategic legal plan to stand up and fire bureaucrats. To travel, for example, to Foggy Bottom and to tell the Career Foreign Service at the State Department, if you have a different foreign policy, if you disagree with the foreign policy of the President of the United States, you're welcome to find other employment. You know, I have joked. There is one government agency I would consider expanding dramatically, and that is our embassy in Iceland. We may well need about 10,000 people there, because if you transferred 10,000 bureaucrats to Iceland, it would have a powerful clarifying effect across the federal government. And I tell you, a very important message for congressional leadership to hear, both Republicans and Democrats, is if you pass legislation filled with corporate welfare, filled with pork, if you pass legislation like the Senate just did this week, reauthorizing the Export-Import Bank,
God damn it. Ooh.
if you behave like you're working for the corporate lobbyist in Washington instead of for the American people, I will veto that legislation. The final point I'll make is this. Listen, breaking the Washington cartel isn't easy. They fight hard. When I say we should repeal Obamacare and abolish the IRS, I'm not remotely naive or Pollyannish. I don't think that's easy. I know that we couldn't do that in the current Congress. The only way to do it, think back to the last time we broke the Washington cartel. It was 1980, the Reagan Revolution, where Reagan took the case to the people, and just like the men and women gathered here today, the Reagan Revolution arose from the grassroots. It swept across this country and it transformed this country. How do you change it? You change the incentives in Washington. You know, there's an old joke that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. My wife says I resemble that remark. How do you change it? Let's go back to 1981. 1981, Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House, told Ronald Reagan, don't send your tax cut plan to me. It's dead on arrival. I've got 20 Democrats to kill it. Now, Reagan didn't cry in his beer. He didn't go sit down and pal around with Tip O'Neill and buy him a drink. He took the case to the American people. He took the case to the American people. That Reagan Revolution rose up, and phone call after phone call after phone call came in, and suddenly all of these Democratic members of Congress who had been no's said, holy cow, if I stand in the way of this, they're going to throw me out of office. I'm going to have to get an honest job. And 20 votes became 19, became 18, became 17, became the largest tax cut in the history of this country. How do you enact fundamental reform? I intend to make the 2016 election a referendum on repealing Obamacare and adopting a simple flat tax to abolish the IRS. And if we come out of November 2016 with a mandate from the people, that's how we get it done. The only thing strong enough is we the people united, is the men and women in this room standing up and leading. And let me say, Iowa starts this process. Iowa has a bullhorn and a pedestal to speak to the nation and I am so grateful for the passion, for the principle, for the commitment to liberty and the Constitution of the men and women in this room. You are changing America, and I am proud to be standing with you.
All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Ted Cruz. Well, it sounds like you're still having fun. Are you still having fun? We still have a lot more candidates.